Alright, this is more of an experimental writing project that I was writing like months ago and really had no time to finish the third part of it. And this is part one, obviously. So, the financial myth of family essentially will cover the uh, the breakdown of civilization through how they rearrange us as a community. And this does have an effect in how the elites are given wealth through our population numbers or through useless material uh, exchange. It became more programmed obsolescence instead of just useless bodies for the system, as our numbers were more or less incentivized down for better or worse. Again, I say this a lot because it's true. It's not all like bad that we aren't having larger families. Like there's good things that came out of this, absolutely. And I will be covering this actually a little bit. Anyways, so a bit of an experimental idea, and I think part two is um, I got lost in a side tangent based on how I really do think about things when it comes to the sick system we live in. And you'll see Malthusian Fraudian, which again is more or less the weird overlap of ideas that I experimented on and sort of talking about. But of course, none of these figures are working together with these ideas. It's just, anyways. Uh, if you're still listening, that's awesome. Anyways, this narrative encompasses many subjects from the family values concept, population management, money behind everything, demography, childhood memories, and predatory coming of age issues hierarchy throws at us. Also, a touch of Nancy Friday emotional sentiment. Now, I once said I was going to read Nancy Friday's The Power of Beauty, but I feel like it's kind of cringe now. The more that I see it, there's more to it than just her perspective. And as I've read more about the background of what she is emotional about, it becomes I don't know. I'm less on her side about it, but I still vibe. It's a really good book. Anyways, which might be more opinion than straight facts, not to mention her odd Freudian projection of how she sees the world, which isn't relevant in my writing other than as an evil archetype that exists in the media. Though her writing of events in her time are very real and accurate to the potential orchestrated gender war amongst other culture war wedge issues the policy strings guide us with. But it should be clear, so this strange crossover of topics is not a critique of genuine connection amongst family, friends, and the broader community, but the jilted structure around what our priorities are and what makes life subjectively meaningful, and what is a plan for them meant something so much more to us along the way. We made poetry within the machines, and there's a sadness that we hold hands with engineered nostalgia hummed by big business, and not our hearts and feelings, but we believe. Alright, so these are just quotes at this point, like you find throughout a book sometimes, and I don't know, I was kind of going for that. Anyways, the financial myth of family, population, gender, and the predator economy. Suzanne Schultz. Whereas the white female body might undergo surveillance by the reproductive machine, the dark female body is subjected to a reproductive apparatus within a hidden, racially coded demographic agenda. Nancy Friday. Until we design a new agreement between the sexes, which includes men's rights as well as women's rights, our men will grow ever angrier and women will too. And this is where I agree, but I don't agree with her. And you would have to read the book for her full like extrapolation on why men's rights are being taken away, which um it's not completely like about a systemic issue against men though. It really isn't. Now her attack is mainly against certain branches of feminism, and Obviously, that goes against the patriarchal system, obviously. Oh, and feminism is always going to sort of be doing battle with the patriarchy for as long as men have womb envy and want to sort of use them for economic potential. And women have long, or sorry, feminists have long known this. So after our ancestors were forced into modern forms from the fist of colonialism against indigenous cultures, destroyed and merged into different groups, the creation of race in different checkpoints of the Greek-Roman Civil War era, from the dust of historical victors, the survival units became valuable in our memories as loved ones, with red lines over who is family. The structure needed the lower and middle caste money to stay afloat amongst a farm with high child morbidity and mortality, the elite growing from the body count if it kept up with the living production. The high number in the family was a ladder of escape into more hopeful opportunities in a state of manufactured poverty, and so big families means you're poor sometimes, as mentioned in the myth of population control states. To talk as Elric does of overpopulation is to say to people you are poor because you are many, as this essay will show quite the contrary. They have large families because they are poor. Again, they use the large family to escape the poverty. And so big families, it was a good thing in a certain stage of the economy, not just in small caste societies like in India, which this quote is from. All right. I am making a distinction from those living in nature as I disagree poverty is the state of nature. Our modern minds not perceiving structure and direction in nature despite its situational abundance. Eventually, factory work phased out farming into a better of multiple evils, sweating in a factory instead of under the sun. Then into survival of the fittest laissez-faire capitalism. Surplus, the wall of excess, merely drove competition of humanity, and eventually the underclass was crushed by industrial growth, while poverty reduction was always capable. Alas, the underclass was still below the feet of the Varna body, where each step is manifest destiny. The rich got richer, but the class is still struggling, pitting race, native-born, indigenous, and immigrant against each other in the labor battles around the Civil War. Unity not in elite interest, obviously. Eventually, less kids phased out inheritance and less splitting up of the land. The split situation made agricultural ownership tight, while family structure growth tended to mean more money from male names. A trend rotting in the background as more farm money ended up into elite hands transformed into mass farmer suicide. The survival units, after our ancestors evolved, became permanent members that we could appreciate and love for an extended time, or at least a memorable checkpoint. Before the 1950s, the limited children of laissez-faire capitalism got the golden age of attention, for better or worse. Nieces, nephews, aunts, grandmothers, and fathers living in the same home, unspoken as money vectors for the system. These people fill elite pockets and banks, but fill our memories, uh, our moments, and our hearts in genuine, meaningful connection. That unfortunately might be Stockholm, but it feels like home sweet home. Now, I do kind of feel like this personally because uh, fundamentalism has been so ingrained, and we have basically been trained to live within a patriarchal framework. And I think the system goes haywire not when it adds a matriarchal female name into the patriarchal framework, but it's only filtered through it, and so it can't really defeat the patriarchy because there's still that lens it's being filtered through. And um, there's some turmoil when something new is added to the system, and this is not the fault of the thing itself, but how the system reacts to it, obviously. And so this would be like how people react to immigrants, how people react to trans people, basically like any new person. So Nancy Friday goes over this family structure trade-off for better technology and medicine. Modern means halting child mortality. Quote, Now that we have medicine and technology, our problem is that we have children, but no parents, and we have lost the extended family of grandparents, uncles, and aunts who once provided not just extra hands, but laps and additional loving eyes that reflected a child to himself or herself. Adult attention, says Penelope Leach, is one of the scarcest commodities in our materially rich homes. Now, again, just skipping a little bit, because I said this already further down a little bit, this is not the fault of materialism. People may play into it and be manipulated and play with the distractions, of course, but again, this is what they want for the populace to be distracted with. Anyways, you know, bread and circus type of stuff, well, you actually are chained to the floor. Now, obviously, with this nostalgia lens cast aside, we can see the past for what it is. Women are expected to do certain work, stay at home, not taught to drive, no bank account, generally male lineage centered, though women are praised for the eugenic fate of the nation. This only means disturbing sanctions on their bodies. Men, as a concept, might not think this way. They needed love as well and fight the struggle alongside women. Again, this is very true. But patriarchy only weaponizes male myths of symbolic sexuality to build civilization, makes men see feminism in an awkward light as a decadence decay sentiment. Despite this sexist nature of society, I'm ambivalent about child's mentally perceived geometry of social design before the gender binary household of the nuclear family unit. So I made up this geometry of social design to mean like just perceptual, not so much focus on gender to focusing on gender ratio. And obviously that might not make sense because, you know. Anyways, so sorry. Humans in large-scale society notice gender differences, but in households of multiple women and men, the distinctions to the child is possibly personality dependent, not only with stress bounced off multiple people in the household with a large family instead of two or one parents, but it could provide more comfort, belonging, and molding of their own personhood. Unfortunately, trade-offs of freedom in these dynamics might go against the rosy image. The geometry I'm talking about is really about options in development and perception before binary family structure. This would affect concepts like you're just like your mother, father or mother, where your behavior expands based on other members of the family. This doesn't necessarily entail morals or freedom, as family could have terrible role models, statistically higher abuse and sexual assault in families as a skeleton for our nostalgia. But this golden age of attention from family is very different from today's shrinking family with its global access to anyone all at once on the internet. As children lose the community and shrinking family geometry in real life, this jilted development is filtered through the internet. The loss of the gaze from the family unit is replaced with desperate attention to the world. I think it would be more sad to limit this to insults like mommy and daddy issues when the father or mother isn't there, since the family has been breaking down ever since. Unfortunately, this happens both ways, where not only are loving families having a hard time, but the family values and family planning model will devour and assume its power over others unwarrantedly. Amendments created to halt human coercion in the face of aggressive national peer pressure. Our family problems, losing the children, the capitalist trash pile, cannot necessarily be blamed on freedom, woman independence, and individualization, but the intersection of our individual struggles are corrupted down the line by corporate hands, like the birth control, vaccine, food, shelter, college expenses, as they say, all the nice things. The divide and conquer of our necessities is why we can't have them. The family provided base love and development, but unfortunately not paying for your college, as education wasn't the goal for some, especially for women, unfortunately. They really had to struggle and become vicious to claw their way at the top of the patriarchy that was not fond of seeing women succeed in that brains versus brawn way. But maybe someone made you food. Sadly, a marriage might not be for love, but status preservation. But the youth fantasized of love beyond economic needs. though the family in a royal or famous situation no longer leads to incest anymore as it has. Monarchy becoming symbolic, morphing into the geriatric empire that never gave up power, absorbing the wealth from the future generations while blaming elderly Social Security as the demographic burden. History has never been a perfect balance or linear direction. Privilege permeates as a spectrum. There was never a perfect way to live no matter how you engineered it. It's not impossible, I mean, I should have said, but it's not impossible to have a world where you had 10 people in a family and everyone had PhDs, or a universe where male lineage openly mattered more but could own their own home, drive, and deny birthing children. Or 10 children from a mother could have been born who all survived, but usually none of these are the case. The love we learned along the way for the extended family was not exactly intentional, but once elites noticed this, they sold it back to us as the product to continue funneling money for the system as a feedback loop. Policies of family values, what became a survival strategy, social and religious, then became a financial cog. Eventually, freedom in the form of intersectional sisterhood, voluntary motherhood, workers' rights, and proper parental Margaret Mahler separation was always a threat to the hierarchy. But intersectionalism was hijacked by the Reaganomic neoliberal market deregulation above the state, trying to sell you everything enough to flood the oceans, while capitalism whispers of the revolution to mock the underclass. Reagan's "Make America Great Again" echoed into the future. The epidemic of programmed obsolescence, materialism, to choke the planet was inevitable. Money had to be made, and a new vector to transfer money to the other replaced the old model of the Stockholm family model that initially produced high mortality labor. Instead, brands, mass convenience, commercial culture filled the economic potential. The high child mortality ceiling became the material debt ceiling. Materialism, in this case, also means government borrowing money. This is in no way claiming citizen materialism ruined family structure and caused birth decline. Freedom became too much to bear, so wealth was hoarded by elites more, as families were incentivized down by family planning. And useful materialism as the money transfer exchange instead of child mortality and child slavery to pull business. Although slavery, international antinatalism, and eugenics tend to go by different names, meaning open slavery is out, hidden migrant child labor is in. The golden age of attention from family is real, but it's an illusion of progress. Just like proper separation from parents' arms to become their own person is an illusion. There is, unfortunately, always strings attached. The fundamentalist culture shames you for not having a family or having kids, promoting the myth of the parental instinct. Meanwhile, neoliberal freedom promotes abstinence, independence, and childlessness as a form of strength, as a duty to the planet environmentalism. The class struggle is always going to be weighed down by oppositional reproductive ideologies. The pro-natal versus anti-natal in the hands of elite agendas. But outside of the politics, corruption, and mechanical ways of explaining things, on a down-to-earth level of the individual in their everyday life, it isn't all strife as roles become expected, conditioned and romanticized in cultural memories. We love what we thought they had in our greatest fantasies, and despite whatever propaganda, the contract comes off as consent. But again, it wasn't all doom and gloom. As family got smaller, weaning out the golden age, having less children, the concept of childhood was born, and separation from parents to be themselves, spacing out children, abstinence, etc., as World Bank agendas promotes it, meant more friendships, not being not being arranged into marriages, no longer stuck in a chimney, and venturing further to explore the world with the flashing lights of everything we always wanted. Of course, it was the trap of capitalism, who were always one step ahead. The economy would feel a bump of energy for a while as women worked for the system, trying to raise children at the same time, or figuring out what archetype that society tries to sell them. Men were always allowed more leeway in terms of identity and expression, violence through war, promiscuous and with many wives, hoarding the wealth. Of course, manhood changes and standards differ between cultures. Shame for not fitting the masculine narrative is obviously right around the corner. On the backs of economic madness brewing in the background, we played outside at parks, went to concerts, tricked people with walkie-talkies, jump rope, rode our bikes around the community, toys you could only dream of, the 80s and 70s seen as the dominant capitalist era. Those of us who were developed by the abundance of separation childhood before the internet absorbed our social lives got to truly experience a coming of age generation that children coming of age that children after us will never get back. As the material debt ceiling got worse, mimicking the Great Depression in the modern world, a cement of detriments compounded into the next generation. The next pandemic has always been theorized in many books, but nobody ever knew what they were talking about, as epidemiology at one point in the 60s to 70s thought of human population as a disease surrounding Asian societies. Malthusians funding mass sterilization campaigns in the Third World to protect national security and freedom. Demographers were skeptical. They saw the First World autonomy to contraception as the threat to the nation greater than any outside threat. War, plague, starvation, etc. didn't compare to the wound of childless economy for the working class, claims Ben Wattenberg in his 1980s book The Birth Dearth, working for Lyndon B. Johnson initially. Also, Johnson outspoken on population issues. Quote, next to the pursuit of peace, the really greatest challenge to the human family is the race between food supply and population increase. Now, this was obviously a time when everybody was like panicking about this topic, and we all know that uh, resources pretty much will always crush human population. The population collapse will be not enough people to deliver the resources, honestly. Children at this time were fielded on if they wanted children themselves, while the population plan wasn't working under supposed democracy in other places. But all we wanted was to go down the hot slide at the park or at the arcade. The internet has potential. It allows for instant information, but objectively was not necessarily the point despite worldwide connection. It merely amplified what already existed, and so we got stuck in echo chambers of like-minded people for better or worse. But actual biological connection is missed out. The communication cues of face-to-face go unnoticed without lag. School taught us all to sit still as recess is removed, coinciding perfectly with conditioned sitters to sit in front of a computer screen. This isn't working. This isn't making everyone addicted, but it's becoming a disproportionate problem for the youth. There was that was easier for parents to control until the internet was in their phones. When COVID-19 hit the scene in 2020, only revealed our issues despite the masks. The lockdown from broader remaining community affected a whole schooling generation on top of generations already disaffected by the education system, the health system, infrastructure, wealth redistribution, food insecurity, a wage slavery, the two-party system. How could older generations ever promote hope or to rational thought to the youth when the only hope we had was having fun outside or playing video games after school? Our parents just wanted us to be safe. We weren't trying to be political, especially in times of peace after World War II and the Cold War. These times might have been peak childhood before Bush and 9/11 era generations saw what happened. So today's kids have no choice to be political in the face of tyranny and failing policy to address rampant gun violence. Despite the grueling education in America, some honestly admit we just want to live through high school. Meanwhile, out of nowhere, the workers becoming suddenly essential to the system during and after lockdown to virtue signal. Most likely, nobody took this seriously, even if we're on the edge of ruinous debt. It is a fact certain utilities mattered more than others to maintain the empire. We were highlighted as important for a short moment, time and money on average, taking everything for granted. The COVID-19 pandemic, in demographer eyes, was a double threat to the economy. The lack of workers under lockdown, despite the health benefits it doesn't account for in the long run, and legal abortion under Roe, currently working on contraception restriction. But it seemed appropriately connected uh, that to balance out deaths from COVID, they take away the rights to abortion for future investment generations, infringing on democracy, like Ben Wattenberg speculated they could never do when he hypothetically said, quote, attention couples, have children or else. Until then, the geriatric empire threatens and neglects the youth through policy inaction, allowing chaos to happen in spite of our amazing childhoods. Sadly, it might have always been this way. Other child's rights falling through the cracks of our privileged childhoods. Since 2017, child marriage was legal in 50 states, and only recently has it gone down to 40, allowing about 24 states that allow for child marriage at 16. Meanwhile, the culture war weaponizes the LGBT community as groomers. But capitalism was one step ahead as usual, selling them their image to society, pretending to stand for marginalized people, to purposely cause tension to an already radical base, igniting stochastic terror with bomb threats to child hospitals. How pro-life of them. Around the beginning years of COVID-19, in the wake of Roe v. Wade, a young girl 10 years old was raped and forced to travel for an abortion because of the trigger laws. Many justified her carrying the terms, specifically lawyer and family council member Jim Bopp saying, quote, she would have the baby, and as many women who have babies as a result of rape, we would hope that she would understand the reason and ultimately the benefit of having the child. Actually disgusting, should be sent to the sun, literally. Originally, parents could put child blocks on the internet back in my day to restrict websites. I remember only being able to look up like Dragon Ball Z websites, even though it was obvious that I wanted to look at like chicks and stuff, but obviously, parents are one step ahead of you, I guess. Anyways, and whether through parental inaction, the separation dynamic, or evolving communication in general, capitalism sold us trends that also drew in children, stuck in a door of revolving iPhones. The internet had potential, but it became a new version of predatory means to an end. So obviously capitalism always manipulated children with like bright colors in the form of McDonald's and fast food. I'm pretty sure this is obvious. The politicians in Utah and other unraveling internet restrictions are putting curfews and doing more to discriminate what children should not be exposed to, which is a good thing, mimicking parental caution, but unfortunately things are vague enough to be mere opinion, and LGBT bents in some language of these new looming bills. Quote, protect minor children from the transgender in our culture. The ambiguous nature of the internet was always the problem. It really continues to be the Wild West, where the AI asks if we're human. But again, before the internet filled the social void into parasocial behavior, children simply needed appropriate amounts of love and freedom to be who they are. But it's not so simple for us to have had sacred childhoods in the patriarchal framework, which spins the model of the Oedipus child-parent relationship. This awkward generational coming-of-age battle for men and women to not be bound up by family that tries to absorb them, mother or father, continues to be absolutely prevalent and growing with the birth decline. These disturbing emotions from a hierarchy, the key players in these predatory sentiments being the anachronistic symbolic male sexuality that created industrial society, joining hands with the infantile dependent woman that grows younger by the minute from hierarchy's desperate projection. This desperate projection has absolutely been a trend that's escalating. For example, Nancy Friday in her book The Power of Beauty explains this infantile dynamic from the modeling industry. Quote, nothing announces our readiness more than today's emphasis on beauty, models being the icons of the age. Several seasons ago, smocked baby dresses, pinafores, and patent leather Mary Jane shoes stole the fashion limelight. These were baby clothes for adult women who indeed wore them with unabashed enthusiasm. After my initial reaction of horror, the look struck me as absolutely appropriate for a society in desperate need of understanding its beginnings. And again, she's a Freudian, but she doesn't go as far as to agree with the mother instinct, so she actually has some common sense there. Anyways, so even though Nancy is a Freudian, she still was initially disturbed by this inevitable societal expectation from predator economy to put on the baby ebonics and weaponize that to desperate young men watching their anime, age stripped from their forms, but the plot to remind you of their immortal youth. Recently, this propaganda dropped in the form of a movie called Poor Things, which has multiple interpretations. But the basic plot is summed up as a pregnant woman dies, but a scientist was able to save the baby, putting the baby brain in the body, sorry, putting the baby brain in the mother. And this may be simplifying, but most of the learning experiences for the baby brain implanted woman were over sexualized in nature, going on many sexual journeys, as far as I've heard, turning her adventure into a virtue signaling strength or equality in liberation, an overview states. But it's really an implied infantile fantasy projected onto women. Patriarchy couldn't get a boom of births it wanted, so they eat their own with symbolic incest, the empire going back to its royal roots. You can only imagine the uproar and terrorism that would have been attempted or threatened if this were a representation of LGBT issues, how sick in the head and further medicalized they would be seen to the greater people who are already skeptical. But no, it's an ancient anxiety of Malthusian libido throwing a hissy fit by killing the third world and raping the youth. Alright, and you can go to Substack to see my sightings, just scrolling for you guys, presuming you're still here. So, I will be reading part 2 soon. Not sure when I'm gonna finish part 3. Yo, work is fucking crazy. Alright, guys. See you in the next one.